As many have heard me say before, never underestimate the power of delusion. I especially find myself saying this to people who are in deeper stages of realization, even no self-realization, that it behooves you to make a study of delusion, understand its nuances, looking into your own experience as the primary source of education, your own tendencies, your own biases, your own triggers, your own coping mechanisms, your own ways of dissociating, your own ways of fooling yourself, fooling others, your own ways of distraction, going unconscious. And since I've never done it before, in this talk, I'm going to tie that into the Lord of the Rings. Didn't see that coming, did you? I didn't until about 20 minutes ago either. Maybe there's someone in here who's not familiar with the movies or the books, but probably most are. And it's obviously the whole journey through the 3 books is the hero's journey. Clearly, has all the motifs of the hero's journey in many components. But Tolkien did something ingenious at the end when the climax of the whole journey is unfolding and Frodo's on the mountain. And he's called to finally throw the ring that binds them all into the fire. And at the last minute, he can't do it. He actually becomes obsessed with the power of the ring, or the ring's effect finally overtakes him, which it hadn't before. Not fully. It had affected his health, and it had caused him harm, but his intention was true the whole time. His intention to carry out his task that he was tasked with by the forces that be. But in the end, he couldn't actually do it. So the story isn't a story of the triumph of will, that will alone will triumph over evil, or let's say delusion. This is something I talk about all the time, that your own will, your own ambition for awakening will only get you so far. At some point, something else is needed. That will be tested many times, in the same way Buddha was tested underneath the Bodhi tree. And so, yeah, Frodo couldn't do it. He suddenly became possessed with the effect of that ring and the power it holds or held. And if you remember, what actually finally brought the whole thing to resolution wasn't Frodo, wasn't any of the hobbits, right? It was Gollum's greed that ultimately caused him to fall into the fire with the ring. So the moral of the story isn't that greed ultimately wins out, although I think there is something very poignant there, that greed and ambition ultimately destroys itself. It's the self-destructive process, even though it can take form that is rather effective at reorganizing societies and families and people's psyches in destructive ways. Clearly happens all the time and all around us, the power of delusion. But ultimately it destroys itself, and then it starts again and again and again, right? Kind of like in the Matrix, the resetting that's happened over and over and over, you find out about, or the say in like Harry Potter, how Voldemort rose again, right? And how Sauron rose again in the Lord of the Rings, like this sort of cyclic power struggle, or acquisition of ambition, and then this self-destruction of that ambition. See it all throughout history. Every great nation, at one point or another, sooner or later, or every great leader. And the more ambition, the more destruction, and often the more dramatic and often rapid the self-destruction that occurs. So this is the wheel of karma, right? We watch it play out, and actually everybody's innocent at every level of power. They're taken over by it, right? Just like Frodo, who is kind of the epitome of innocence in this whole storyline. Even he was taken over in the end by the force of delusion. And he had to be. It's part of the deal, right? It's part of the whole cycle. So what is it that ultimately caused the destruction of the ring, which was the whole goal of the story, right? What caused it in the end? Well, Golem falling into the fire with the ring. But why was Golem able to even be there? Because of Frodo's mercy, right? Frodo in the past, or earlier in the story, had opportunities to kill Golem, and his main companion wanted him to. He thought he should because Golem was trying to corrupt the whole thing. He was trying to derail it the whole time. But through Frodo's own mercy, he allowed Golem to live. And if he hadn't allowed Golem to live, then Golem wouldn't have been able to save him from himself in the end through his own greed. So the whole thing like works together that way. So in the end, it's mercy, right? Compassion, love. So it was Frodo that did save the day, but not in a direct way, and not in an intentional way, and not through will, and not through having a perfect character, but through compassion, through mercy, right? This is the value of surrender. Arguably the best Western spiritual teacher in any recent past would be Adyashanti. And he certainly used the word surrender more than anyone I've ever heard. And he mentioned several times that his own path was one of failure, one of surrender, and so forth. And it's like that with awakening and realization. Even if you bring great will to bear, that warrior energy down into a one-pointed focus, some intense process like a koan practice, perhaps like a Renzai Zen training, doesn't get any more intense and masculine and warrior-like than that. And yet, what ultimately results in the shift, what ultimately results in Kensho, is when that gets exhausted, right? It's kind of like the universe says, you have a lot of will, you have a lot of intention, ambition. Okay, let's focus that on something. Focus that down and on trying to make the universe do what you think it needs to do. And you will be disappointed, ultimately. Completely. You won't just be disappointed, you'll be completely exhausted, depleted. You will surrender, not by choice, by the process. That's the beauty of it. It's not the only way to do it. But ultimately, it is surrender that flips the thing over. Surrender to what? Surrender to what's always just the case. You can hear it 100 times, you can hear it 1,000 times, but until you've really disrupted the identity structure or exhausted the will, you won't see it fully. You'll understand it. You may understand it. You might even talk about it. You may even teach about it. But without exhausting that, authentically, sincerely exhausting that ambition, that insistence that you can make the world look the way you think it should look, or make your life look the way you think it should look, or get what you think you want, all based on thoughts, which are based on delusion, which are based on fundamental misperceptions and socially endorsed, to the level of obsession among the entire human race with various surrogates for peace and happiness. And that's a powerful force. It's too powerful, right? It's too powerful to fight with your personal will. And that's what Frodo found out on the mountain in the end. But his willingness to move from a place of compassion, trust in the process, and just surrender to his own innocence. Yeah. Willingness to not judge Gollum too harshly because Gollum was just as unconscious as anybody else. He was just the symbol of unconsciousness in the story, right? But everybody was corrupted by the ring. Everybody was overtaken by its power. Even Gandalf, like the powerful wizard, didn't want to touch the ring, right? He didn't want to touch it because he knew the power it had and how destructive it could be if it used him as a vehicle. So that's wisdom, right? That's the wisdom of monasticism, of renunciation, to purposely move yourself away from the triggers that are very powerful, the desires and situations that tend to suck us in. So for a while, it's helpful to have that skillful means of withdrawing from that which will pull us into delusion easily, habits and so forth, and structuring habits that help to cultivate more fertile ground for awakening, retreat settings, practices, meditation, mindfulness, and so forth. All that's valuable, of course. But the real beauty of this whole story is that in the Lord of the Rings books, there was a character that wasn't in the movies, I don't think at all. But this character was the true symbol of enlightenment. And that was Tom Bombadil. I don't know if anyone knows who that is, but he was this quirky guy who was purposely left as an enigma by the author, who lived in a little house on the edge of the forest. But he was completely immune to the powers of the ring. And it was demonstrated in the story. He didn't get triggered by ideas of ambition or power. He was just inert. It was inert to him. And he carried himself with a joyful countenance. He was funny, joyful. He sang a lot, and he was a bit of a jester, trickster. And he was so detached from ambition that he actually didn't play into the whole storyline of the ring and the mountain and Sauron and Mordor and all of it. He was just sort of indifferent to it all, detached, you could say, or he lived with the practice of dispassion, but it was effortless. It didn't appear that it was something he was doing purposely or as a practice or to have any sort of outcome. He's just the absolute aspect. He's the absolute aspect to contrast to the relative aspect that was everything else that happened in the story, the whole storyline of ambition and greed and power and corruption and breaking that cycle of power and corruption in all the ways that happened, which is essentially collapsed on itself, and then the restructuring, and then another power cycle just goes on and on. That's the relative world. It goes on and on and on. And there's probably some evolution in it. There's certainly some evolution in it at certain relative levels, but the cycle is there. The karmic cycle is intact and it continues, right? But Tom Bombadil was just a character that existed alongside of all of it, but he wasn't pulled into it. He even held the ring at one point, and it didn't make him invisible, which he's the only person, I think, in the stories that it didn't cause to be invisible. And he would even jokingly make it appear and disappear. He could actually make the ring disappear totally. That's like a symbol of showing that at some level of insight, even the whole karmic chain, the whole cycle of power and corruption and all of it is not even real. It's real and unreal. And he was demonstrating that. And notably, Tolkien didn't use Tom Bombadil as anything like a solution to the whole problem of power that was the rest of the story. He didn't pose that character as, well, here's the solution, right? At least not directly or knowingly, maybe. But I would argue that he did. There were a couple of story lines where Tom Bombadil actually saved Frodo and his companions from the harrowing situations they got themselves in. One was with Old Man Willow, and another was with a Barrow White. And I think in the Barrow White situation, Frodo even called to him to help. So, although Tom Bombadil is detached from the cycle of karma, he still has compassion in the moment, in the situation where he's called to intervene in the relative. He will, and he did. And that was an act of mercy, an act of compassion. And the storyline doesn't make this connection, I don't think, directly, but perhaps that's where Frodo was given that seed of compassion and mercy. And that's what helped him not to destroy Gollum early on, which led to ultimately the ship righting itself, the story coming to completion in the way it had to, which is Frodo realizing the limits of his own will, realizing he is subject to corruption at some point. Everyone has their limit, right? That's what he realized, and also the power structure itself collapsed in on itself, and all of that could be said to be set in motion by the acts of compassion and mercy that Tom showed Frodo and his friends. So the resonance for me with this way of looking at it is, this is how enlightenment functions. Very mysterious. And there's a thorough, clear understanding that there's no need to intervene in the relative at all. That everyone is already intrinsically free. That the relative world of mind identification, thought identification, greed, aversion, confusion, distortions, delusion, all of it doesn't actually exist. Enlightenment is that realization. It's a clear seeing of that. So you can live knowing that in your marrow. And established in that, call it maybe the absolute aspect, then the relative not being apart from the absolute, of course the relative can't be apart from the absolute, or you wouldn't be able to see through the illusion of delusion itself. Right? Steeped in the relative with no insight in the absolute, the delusion is very real. It's very harmful, and it's very, most importantly, it's a prison. You feel yourself to be in that prison of delusion when you're growing up as a child and you had unconscious parents. You could just feel that prison you were in. Couldn't name it, didn't know what it was, didn't understand the mechanisms of thought identification, didn't understand that your parents were repressing emotion. Couldn't see that they did love you, and they also didn't see you. And they also didn't always take as good a care of you as you needed. All of that. You didn't see that clearly, but you felt it. You felt that prison. Right? That's what it feels like to be a seeming separate self in that field of relative. You feel the delusion and you identify with the delusion. It's uncomfortable, which itself is ingenious. That's what leads us to start to inquire. The suffering itself is the path. It is the path. The only path, really. The discordance, the feeling that something's off. The initial surrender is the surrender to that truth. The surrender to the truth of what it feels like to be a human among other humans when almost everyone's unconscious and it's uncomfortable, right? So it's finally letting go of the projection, the persona projection onto out to the world. It says, I'm okay, I'm fine, everything's great. Right? Letting go of that. That's the start. That's the starting place. um, and yeah, this. I'm always hesitant to talk about an enlightened perspective or a liberated perspective because it's so free that there's no description for it. Even say it has an intention is inaccurate is inaccurate in a very real way. To say it has its finger on the scale of what should or shouldn't happen, including your own suffering or not suffering, is not accurate. But it's also not accurate to say it doesn't care at all, that there's no compassion. You could say if it moves at all, it moves through compassion. If it does anything at all, it frees. If it does anything at all, it holds your hand and helps you look closely at your own suffering, see what it actually is, that it's a portal to salvation, your own salvation. And it does this effortlessly and without any attachment to the outcome. I made a series of videos recently that I thought was interesting. Talking about how I interact with people when they're waking up and this is exactly what I'm talking about, and how there's no intention. I don't feel like, oh, I need this person to wake up, or it's not like I care whether they wake up or not. That's actually not there, strangely. It can't be, because if it is, then I have an agenda. And if I have an agenda, it's about me, not them. Every time. That's just true. And at the same time, it's not hard to look at my life and see that, okay, more and more over time, it's oriented itself toward this moment of recognition and holding someone's hand and saying, let's look into it. Let's see what's there. But there's no good or bad to it. It's not right or wrong. Delusion isn't delusion. Samsara isn't samsara. So samsara is nirvana. Practice is enlightenment. There's no distinctions. It's just kind of like some magic. Maybe you could say the interface between relative and absolute can only be realization. That's the only place that they even seem to be distinct, relative and absolute. Right? Every teaching, every pointing, every koan, every inquiry question is provisional. None of them stand on their own. To relieve one from fixation, you don't just relieve the fixation, you relieve the one from themselves. So then there's no position to try to hold anymore. That's freedom. Freedom from delusive hindrance. And it works in mysterious ways. A simple act of compassion, a simple act of mercy, which really just means a willingness to inhabit the human heart and the relative in a moment when the conditions arise without thinking about it. The effects of that are far reaching, and you won't know what they are. Just like Frodo could have never planned that by showing mercy to Gollum was the only way he could allow Gollum to continue to live, and then his own ego battle with Gollum, his own power struggle with Gollum ultimately caused the self-sacrifice of Gollum and the destruction of the ring. He couldn't have planned that. But in the moment, he trusted his heart. So this is why I think I emphasize shadow work. And if someone's not particularly interested in awakening, there's a lot they can do to clarify their heart. And it's also why, with awakening, even clear, deep realization, without doing that shadow work, you'll become unskilled in the relative. You'll just become unskilled in the relative. You'll be avoidant to the relative, and you'll think that's the full embodiment of the absolute, but it isn't, because the absolute has to include the relative. They are the same. Yeah. So, as I said earlier, every teaching is provisional. Description of the absolute is provisional, right? Realization of the absolute is a very real insight, but it's not the final insight. Maybe there is no final insight, but it's certainly far from total naturalness. The 10th Oxfording picture, I'll probably forget part of it, but it's barefoot and naked of breast, I enter the marketplace with my wineskin, whatever, and I return, and everyone I look upon becomes enlightened. I use no magic to extend my life. Now before me, dead trees become alive. That's to see the absolute, live the absolute within the relative. Yakujo's fox is the second koan in the Mumonkan. Kan. So it's perfect. It's just about this. Exactly. Freedom within conditions. That's freedom. Freedom from conditions will feel like freedom, the absolute aspect. But at some point, the more you hold on to that, the more things will feel off. And then you'll find out what true freedom is through surrender, redemptive love, deep shadow work, willingness to let go of all, and this is the key, willingness to let go of all aspects of spirituality, all of your ideas about spirituality and the specialness of it, and your specialness for being involved in it. All that can be let go of. And it will be. Then you can move in any realm effortlessly, but you don't do it by choice or will or preference. It just happens naturally. That's freedom.